and welcome to this weekly BitShare presentation. All recordings produced by the Beyond Bitcoin Show are free to share. So please, feel free and email us to friends, family, and business colleagues. If you need more information about BitShares, then please visit the website at bitshares.org. Again, that's bitshares.org. We would like to say thank you for joining us, and please enjoy the show.
Today is Friday, December 5th, 2014. We're here with Bytemaster for his weekly hangout with the BitShares community. This is here for you guys. Feel free to ask questions to Bytemaster. We start normally with a opening update, and then we move into community questions, and if we have time, we'll go to the Reddit. With that said, do you want to start with the update?
It's been a busy 2 weeks. I almost can't remember where we were 2 weeks ago. I'd say the biggest thing that we've been doing here in head office is to focus on user-issued assets and voting. And those are the primary focus of the past 2 weeks. The purpose of this is to facilitate gateways to issue their own assets. Also to help facilitate companies issuing their shares on our chain. And we're doing all this to prepare for protocol version 1.0, which is going to be a stable release of the blockchain itself that will not hard fork. And then we'll focus on the next 6 months or so just adding features to the wallet to take advantage of the features the blockchain already supports. So to that end, we've added some really critical features to user-issued assets. One is the ability for the issuer to have multi-sig control over the asset to transfer the asset. So that's going to be huge. The other is that we now have sub-symbols, just like sub-accounts, so that if you're going to be an issuer of many assets, all your assets can have the same namespace. And that prevents fraud on symbol names. We added the ability for users for the issuer to create proposals for their asset and for the shareholders in that asset to vote for those proposals. It uses the same mechanism as delegate voting, only instead of voting for a delegate, it votes for asset proposal. This was a major feature requested by Overstock because they're trying to replace corporate shares, and so that's a feature they will need. The issuers now have the ability to be effectively a co-signer. They have the ability to have complete control over every balance. That means they can take back your funds, they can transfer your balance, cancel your orders. This is done transparently. It's on the blockchain. You're inherently trusting the issuer anyway. But this is necessary for issuers to comply with government requests to seize assets and or freeze accounts. It's possible now to have a restricted asset that can only be owned by a whitelist of public keys. This is useful for companies that cannot legally sell shares to the public, but they might want to issue their shares to employees or qualified investors. It allows them to comply with the laws while having their assets on a blockchain. All of these features are optional. The issuer can revoke their authority permanently to perform some of these actions. So we're providing the option and the control for people who want it, and people who want to remove that control can give it up forever. The other thing the issuers can do is they can freeze all markets trading in their asset. So this gives the issuers a lot of power over their issued asset, and we hope it will allow gateways to comply with all the laws they need to comply with for issuing their assets directly on the blockchain. So we also have been working with people who are trying to do just that. We've been working with a few companies that want to issue assets and make that a reality. So that's where we are on the user-issued asset front. I'll take questions on that now before we talk about what we're doing on the voting front.
You talk about overstock. Isn't it going to XCP counterparty?
Yes, Overstock effectively bought out Counterparty, but that doesn't change the fact that when we were talking with them, they expressed what they were looking for, and that represents a feature set that is not unique to Overstock.
So it's something that's going to be required industry-wide.
It represents market demand. It represents something that Overstock is probably trying to figure out how to implement on Counterparty.
You were saying something about with the user-issued assets being able to comply with legal issues that, with legal issues that they would encounter. Do you have any? Do you have a basic idea that you can give people who are thinking about issuing user-issued assets? Some basics to be careful of, not doing. Things that they might need to know, things that they might not want to do, anything to that?
Well, my advice is that you can't do anything with a user-issued asset that you can't do with actual shares in your company. So if you're going to sell shares in your business to raise capital and you're offering it directly to the public, you need to go through the SEC if you're in the United States. If you're in another country, then you're going to have to look into your own laws. So all I know is that if I'm a small business and I want to give my employees shares, I need to whitelist only employees can own the shares so that it's not a public offering. If I allow my employees to have shares and then they sell it to someone, it becomes a public offering. So that's one aspect of why you need the restricted shares. The other thing is that even if you go public, you still need to know who the owners of your shares are. The ability to have bearer shares is heavily restricted. You can do that in some countries. You can create companies with bearer shares, but the legal stance of bearer shares in the United States has been heavily frowned upon and restricted in recent years. Even the United States has been putting pressure on other countries, such as Panama, to immobilize bearer shares. So these are why we're adding these features. If you're not doing shares, but you're doing IOUs, like deposits, then you have to have know your customer regulations. And if you don't know who your customers are, that's another example where you need to have restricted access if you're in the United States and trying to comply with United States laws. But it also applies for whatever other business you're in. So if you're going to do money transmission, if you're going to be issuing IOUs, if you're going to be creating securities, follow the regulations and study those. If you're in a country that doesn't care about those things, then you don't have to use those features. You can, in fact, disable those features for your asset. Then you can do whatever you want.
Along those lines, it's kind of interesting to me because I'm trying to find this place where, because digital currency isn't necessarily, it's kind of in a gray area in my eyes at least, and I'm trying to figure this out because say if somebody runs a guild in a game, they have a digital currency in game that can be used to, they call them DKP points. So say you form an event and you want your guild to come, you give people DKP for joining up. What would make that not an what would make that an equity? Would that be an equity? Would that be something that would be, if a user were to, say I were to create a coin of sorts or a user-issued asset that doesn't trade for money, or you can't trade it in for fiat currency through an exchange or something to that effect, but I gave the coins to people who attended the Mumble server events. Would that be considered something that would be, I'd have to go through the SEC for?
It all depends on whether or not there's any promise from you to do something to give those coins value. If you're giving them away and people aren't buying them, that's probably safer. But once again, the laws are ambiguous. I can't tell you what they are. It's open to interpretation. So I would generally say that you should ask whether or not you're making, whether or not the value is tied to a liability on you. And if you died, what would the value be?
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions regarding this? Matt 608 is saying if he has a delegate and he creates an asset.
He's trying to get his mic working. Oh, you're just going to type it? Okay, so could I create an asset and share drop it on people who vote for me in proportion to the stake they use? Yes, you could. You'd have to create a bunch of transactions to do so. But if you are a delegate, you can create an asset and share drop it on people.
Then pledge to delegate the delegate funds to whatever proposal they vote for. So they would effectively be directly choosing how they spend the funds.
Yes, you could do that. Your challenge is, what date do you do the share drop for the voting purpose? And once you do the share drop, how do you determine when to drop the asset on more people? But yes, if you wanted to use that as a proposal mechanism, that would be great. The other thing you could do is create an asset called BitShares Proposals and auction it off for development funds. Use the funds to implement whatever proposals people vote on. There's lots of possibilities. I don't think we've even scratched the surface of it.
We've talked a little bit on the forums regarding the idea of a legal delegate. Have you behind the scenes been talking at all about that with anybody, and what are your thoughts on it?
A delegate to perform legal services. I think that each person needs to retain their own legal representation. A delegate that sits there and collects funds seems like, I don't know what they'd be doing. So it's a little vague.
I think the way that we've talked about a few different ways of going about it, but the way I look at it would be more in terms of having something like a delegate who is a legal delegate, which would be able to give basic answers or guidance to the community, and delegates who want to run delegates either on BTS or any of the alternate chains that are popping up. Does that make sense? That's kind of how I envision it anyway.
We'll see what the shareholders think.
MCAT is talking about going back to what Matt 608 was talking about. Isn't that actually like buying tickets or buying votes?
It depends. Are you giving the money back to the people who voted for you? Or are you spending the money on things that they want it spent on to enhance BitShares? I'm going to go out here and say that this is actually a good point of discussion, because I had a long talk with Adam Ernest yesterday about using voting for decision making. I think it's a pretty terrible idea in general, despite the fact that we have voting for delegates. I recommend that people select delegates that can think for themselves and that they trust to think for themselves to make them money, and not create delegates that in turn are just another level of voting. I don't think that's an effective way to allocate it. The profit and loss for the delegate needs to be based upon how effective they are at using the funds to make money. If you make it up to votes, then if the voters screw up, who's responsible, right? No one's responsible. So we already have enough of a problem with 101 delegate positions, because that's the only option we have. But to divide it up further and get finer and finer grained, I think is doing a disservice to the shareholders. It's not an effective delegate. It's like hiring a dumb delegate instead of a smart delegate. highly recommend that we only vote for delegates that have a head on their shoulders and can make intelligent decisions about where the money is spent, rather than delegates that decide they're going to do opinion polling on where the money should be spent. I want delegates who have opinions and who know what needs to be done and who campaign to implement their vision. That is far better for BitShares than delegates who don't know what needs to be done, but say, give me money and I'll spend it on whatever you all think needs to be done. That's a very weak delegate. So let's be very careful when we vote to vote for people that have a vision and a passion and a direction that they are going in, and that they don't need someone to tell them what to do or how to do it, that they already know.
So out of curiosity, what was Adam's stance? You had a conversation about this with him. Did you have any points of agreement and disagreement?
Well, he was, there's someone else visiting the office, and we were having a debate about another form of governance of corporations where the employees can basically vote on what to do. And I was making the argument that you need market forces rather than voting to allocate resources. And I continue to maintain that shared ownership of resources needs to be avoided as much as possible. Unfortunately, BitShares is one gigantic example of shared ownership of a common resource, the blockchain. But as quickly as possible, we need to move into private management so that the profit and loss accrues to the person managing the capital instead of managing other people's money. It's just simple economics that you can never manage other people's money as well as your own, and that you have moral hazard if you separate profit and loss from compensation. So in the case of delegates, they're elected by one vote per share. That's a influence proportional to capital. If the shareholders do a bad job and it falls, it makes it cheaper to buy the shares, and then the new owner, can then vote to change direction and cause the shares to go up in value again. So at least there it's proportional to ownership. If you take it proportional to person, then you've got moral hazards and all the problems of democracies where the poor vote for money from the rich. And so we don't want to create that situation at a blockchain level or within a delegate or other organization. So I was basically highlighting how the market is the most efficient way of recognizing the value of assets and who should own them. Whoever's willing to pay the most sees the most value for it. If they pay too much, they lose money. If they don't pay enough, they lose money. If they get it cheap, they can make money. These are all things that align the incentives. So let's find delegates that we can trust to make money for us because their incentives are aligned. That's far better than finding delegates that aren't thinking.
So House says, I want to vote, but who are these people? What do they offer? Where do I find out their intentions, vision, proposals, etc.?
There's many people out there that are creating websites and tools to help with some of these things. Ideally, all the candidates should, when they register their delegate, they should post a URL or a link to a page that describes them. I know BitShares Blocks was thinking about having delegate pages where you can go to their website and see the proposal. Right now, if you go to the forum, there's a subsection dedicated entirely to delegate bids. That's a good place to see. But right now, I think it's mostly just word of mouth. There are very few people even campaigning for 100% delegates right now, and most of them are on the core dev team are already doing development work. So you can already find out what their intentions are because you can look at what they've done. There's one person that's doing shopping carts. There's someone else doing a web wallet. There's someone else working on mobile. There's the BitShares Blocks team. And then there's, of course, Toast and our core developers. So yeah, there's going to be lots of places where you can get that. But that is a a problem, and it's a problem that the community is actively working to resolve.
Speaking of the active resolution, I just wanted to plug this real quick, Bytemaster, if you don't mind. I want to let everybody know that I'm wholly intending on running delegate hangouts. So if you are planning on running a delegate, please let me know via PM, and we can start looking into that. I'll probably be looking at maybe running my own delegate so I can hire some more people from the community to help me moderate these and set them up.
No, I was just tabbing between stuff. My push talk button got pressed. But House had a question. Will there be a bit more info about delegates in 1.0? The info available is directly proportional to what the delegates are willing to publish. All delegate records in the blockchain have a variant, or basically arbitrary JSON object, key value pairs, that they can publish as much information as they want. People on the forum have recommended a standardized set of data that you can include there, including your location, what you're going to be doing. That information is already there. You don't need to wait for 1.0 of the protocol level. And I want to use this as an opportunity to make sure everyone understands that 1.0 protocol does not mean we have a 1.0 quality user experience. The user experience is a much more difficult effort. We are heading for 1.0 for the back end. This is for the gateways, for the block explorers, for all the people that are trying to build services that don't want to upgrade the BitShares client every time we push an update. So we're trying to separate protocol level changes and get that to a stable spot, which is separate from 1.0 of the wallet.
Does that answer your question, House?
That seems to answer his question.
Does anybody else have any questions regarding this? Go ahead, Byte.
I was just going to say that some other things that we have going on right now is BitShares TV. That is a video campaign of lots of interviews of me talking about all these various issues. It should be updated as on a weekly basis, similar to these Hangouts. It's not interactive with everyone, but hopefully it will provide higher quality video content of some of the same things we're talking about here. I just wanted to plug BitShares TV coming out within the next week or so. Someone asked, will there be a lightweight wallet for the user-issued assets? And the answer is yes, we are working on lightweight wallets for everything, and mobile wallets for everything. So a lot of that has to do with the work that we're doing with Vote. So let me just go ahead and tell you what our progress is on the voting aspects of things. So Nathan Hort, he's one of the core developers, has been working on what we're calling the voting booth, which is a Qt app. It's a Qt, depending on how you say it, application that allows users to validate their identity and cast votes and change their votes. Being Qt, it is easily ported to a mobile phone. We're doing everything over there in a way that should work well on mobile. What does this give us? This gives us the foundation for a lightweight mobile wallet, because after you've identified and done user verification, you're going to have to use a third-party service, a server, in order to manage your balances. So we are going to integrate a lightweight wallet into the voting booth application itself, which will give us a mobile Qt wallet that uses a third-party service. We're thinking about having two versions of it: a free version that uses just a single private key, just like we do today, and a paid version that has multi-sig with the service provider that's broadcasting your transaction, providing the second signature and doing two-factor authentication when you spend your money. And the third signature is a private key that you print out and put in a safe so that you control the funds, and the service provider doesn't. So a lot of the stuff we're doing for Vote are going to apply directly toward getting users into our system, getting them registered, and that ultimately means we can do referral systems, all with a mobile app.
Now, I'm assuming this has some crossover into what's coming up in California with the voting deck being displayed out there. Do you have any details regarding this?
Oh, yes. This is, right now, it's a demo of a voting booth app that we are going to demonstrate the entire process from registering your user through casting your vote and verifying your vote and viewing the results online. We're going to demonstrate all of that next week. It is all working right now. And that's just the foundation, though. The voting steps are going to eventually be integrated into the BitShares blockchain. BitShares is probably going to be the first out there with an actual side chain. So someone asked, when can we begin development on Turing Complete? Turing Completeness will be a feature for after version 1.0 of the protocol. It's probably going to take us many months to hammer out what that means. And in the meantime, we want to have a stable protocol out there for people to be using.
Now, whenever this is completed, is this going to have any other effects on voting?
When what is completed?
Adding the Turing Complete scripting. Is this going to open up any other opportunities?
Every feature opens up opportunities.
So cryptic. So you're going to leave us in the dark?
I'm saying that I don't have the ability to think of all the things that scripting can be used for.
Oh, okay. So you don't have anything necessarily that is in mind that you're keeping as a secret.
I don't keep too many secrets.
Fair enough. Sorry about that. Does anybody else have any questions regarding the voting? I'll say I'm pumped. Next week is when will they find out the results, what the committee has ruled on this afterwards, or?
No, this is not going to be a ruling. This is just going to be a demonstration, getting us support, making contacts. So our main competitor pulled out, so it's just going to be us, so we can't lose.
Well, I'm sure nobody's upset about that here.
Apparently, no one in the voting industry likes open source. Once you realize it has to be open source and free, they don't know how to make money anymore. And we are the only ones, I think, that have a business plan for voting that makes money while being open source.
So you think they're pretty much just like, we have no clue what to do here. Just pulled out because they knew that it was a game they couldn't win?
I think it all has to do with business strategies, and most of these voting solutions end up making their money by licensing their software and charging governments for it. And if they can't license it because it's open source, then their business model breaks down.
On the bleeding edge, man. It's so funny because we don't recognize sometimes that this little community that we have is really on the front lines of a lot of innovation that I think we sometimes take it for granted that the rest of the world doesn't really understand a lot of this yet. It's going to be very interesting. Do you have any other updates for us?
No, why don't we go with questions from Reddit?
Well. Let's see if there's any on here from we are kind of lacking in them this time around.
Okay, so someone asked a question. Can you talk a little bit more about how you envision the transition of municipal governmental voting from what's currently in place? In my humble opinion, the purpose of voting is to give individuals a voice. It's to identify the aggregate opinion of all people. And the aggregate opinion is used by people to then make decisions about how they run their life. It doesn't matter whether it's binding or not, it's going to have an impact. So when the nightly news tells you that, 50% of Americans think X, Y, or Z, right? Whether it's pro-life, abortion, gay rights, name the issue, it affects how other people then think, because people tend to follow the crowd. Like, oh, something is now socially acceptable. A third of the people are, 9/11 is an inside job, right? That's what a third of the people believe. I'm no longer, a minority. I can feel freer to speak my opinion because I know what other people think. So the aggregate opinion is a very important concept, and has great influence on society. What voting does is it's a means of ascertaining that. But if a voting system is not transparent and not provable, then it presents an opportunity for someone to steal your voice and turn it into their own voice, thus controlling the aggregate opinion and then indirectly influencing all of society by controlling the aggregate opinion. Now, this is different from propaganda, where it actually tries to change the real aggregate opinion. But in some sense, whenever the nightly news or TV makes statements like everyone thinks this or so on, those are all attempts at manipulating people by manipulating what we all think other people think. So the purpose of vote is really to provide people a voice that they know can't be tampered with for expressing their opinion, expressing what they think. And that once we have that tool, we can bypass all the scientific polling. We don't care what the official election results are. We have a way of expressing it. We have a way of expressing a protest vote other than not showing up at the polls. Right now, they can lie about just about anything. They can lie about voter turnout. They can lie about who actually won. They can limit the choices, right? You can vote for any color car you like as long as it's black. That's the type of thing we have right now. But with BitShares Vote, or the Follow My Vote, we're giving people a voice. And that is something that they need, whether or not the government recognizes it as a authority on what decision the government's going to make on who gets to be in office. And it's something that people want. If people don't have a voice, they resort to violence. They become apathetic, and then things start breaking down. So we think it's very important that the vote system is going to save lives. It's going to give an outlet to millions of people, and eventually it can replace scientific polling and government elections entirely. Because we can, in theory, offer this service without having to charge the government a penny. Taxpayers won't have to pay a thing in order to have voting. And right now, the government probably spends on the order of $5 to $10 per voter. So you're talking $500 million to $1 billion per year just to put on an election. We can remove all that from the taxpayer's burden. So there's going to be a very compelling argument for the government to adopt what we're doing. They might not do it initially, but individuals who understand the importance of having their voice and preventing their voice from being stolen will want to use this system. It's going to be more convenient, and hopefully it will have more influence than the actual voting.
Crypto Prometheus asks a very important question, in my opinion. how will identity verification take place without government involvement?
Oh, it happens every day without government involvement. Every bank that you do business with does know your customer validation. So there's dozens of reputation systems out there. But the way we envision it for vote is that you have multiple independent parties, preferably on opposite sides of a campaign, right? You have the Republicans, the Democrats, the liberals, conservatives, the constitutionalists, the anarchists, right? You get a couple competing authorities to verify your identity. And then the only identities that exist in the system are the identities that have been verified by more than one entity. And if you're not happy with existing entities, you can start up a new identity verification entity. And then it's going to be up to the individual to, heavily automated by the software, of course, to get their identity verified by as many people as possible so that their voice is as strong as possible. The more identity verifiers you have, the more your voice ultimately counts, because it's more likely that you're unique and not a sock puppet of some special interest group. So we're going to remove the ability of the government to manufacture identities. Once we do that, then we have a real sample of actual people. And then we have a two-step process that, once you have your identity verified, then we have the issuing of your ballot, which only requires that you reveal your location or some other non-identifying piece of information. So you can still vote in secret.
So what Crypto Prometheus is asking is, accounts will be ranked by levels of legitimacy regarding identity verification?
Yes, the more verifiers that have signed off on your identity, the more elections or polls you'll be able to vote in. And the polls that require more identity verifiers in turn have greater weight than the polls that only require one identity verifier. The elections that want to have very high weight should have a lot of verifiers, a lot of redundancy. The ones that don't need that, they can have fewer. The fewer you have, if you only have one identity verifier, they can create a limited number of identities, and in theory, they can completely stuff the ballot, right, with fake identities. But as soon as you have two or more, now they have to collude in order to stuff the ballot. And we're working on making it easy to add additional verifiers, easy to automate the process of an individual applying for verification with multiple verifiers, so that you take a picture of yourself, a picture of your government ID, and your computer will automatically submit it to all the verifiers you'd like. The verifiers will analyze it, look for duplicates, look for frauds and forges and things like that, and then approve you.
Do you think that there will be multiple verifiers to the extent that you'll have some that are used for financial transactions and others that are used for government transactions, and that one day everybody will just by de facto standard use the government thing because that's what the biggest demand is?
Everyone will use all of them. I think if you just go to using the government one, you're right back to where we are today, where the government can manufacture IDs and then stuff the ballot box.
That's exactly my concern. Thank you.
So you could essentially have it where instead of like a forum could use this, or a website could use this, and they could actually verify them as well and serve two purposes. They could be protecting against Sybil attacks and also potentially profit off of being a verifier.
Right. So the cost of doing a verification is about $1. That's what Jumio charges in bulk for doing identity verification. So if you as an individual want to get verified by 3 organizations, it costs about $3, assuming they're all as efficient as Jumio. Now, Jumio's got their profit margins in there, and they're probably 50%. So in reality, we're talking about 50 cents per verification, or $1.50 if everyone's doing it at cost. The competition will heat up. Now, right now, the way it works is if every site that tries to use Jumio for Know Your Customer validation, they pay Jumio $1 or $2 to verify each user. And if you get verified on 3 different sites, Jumio makes money off of you 3 times. What we're doing is we're giving you the ID. Jumio will effectively sign off on your ID, and then you can present your ID with their signature on it to anyone. So it's verified once, used many times. It's in the hands of the owner instead of the businesses having to pay each time you do business with them. It means that when people are trying to do polls to figure out what the most popular cryptocurrency is, the most influential user, it can't be spammed by fake Twitter accounts and Facebook accounts, but instead it could be based upon real people, and it can even be limited to real people in some country. So you can figure out what's the most popular cryptocurrency in China versus the United States without having to worry about spammers. It means if you're doing a business, you can have Know Your Customer validation immediately. It means if you're going to sign contracts with people digitally, you'll have an ID with which you can do it. These are all the things that you can do when you give the user control of an identity that's been verified by multiple agencies. That's a core asset that every individual should have. I suspect that we are working on a plan to make identity verification free for the user. And in fact, maybe negative, paying people to have their identity verified.
That's awesome. It's interesting because this is something that even on a very small level, like in something like Bitcoin Talk, you see a lot of these different polls, and it's very easy for these polls to be gamed, despite the fact that Bitcoin Talk is a pretty well-run forum for what they're working with. You can see how something like this just changes the game because the Sybil attacks flourish on Bitcoin Talk. You know, it's pretty easy to make 4 or 5 accounts and vote for the same person in a poll or for the same cryptocurrency. So this is essentially what you're talking about, is potentially even rewarding people for registering their identity and protecting against those Sybil attacks.
Exactly. When you have a unique identity, you have a much stronger presence and voice on the internet than when you don't. It means that you can't create a million forum handles, and that the forum handles that have revealed their identity are much more trusted. The people are better behaved when their identity is known because they're not hiding behind a wall of anonymity. So there's all kinds of value add for the end user for having something that can actually validate their identity online automatically, easily, without them having to do a lot of work. Just log into a website and you're done.
I have a question, kind of philosophical for you there, Bytemaster, and that is, with all the value that you're describing here with regard to identity, and I agree with you, there are definite values there. What would you say the value of anonymity is?
The value there is to be able to speak freely without fear of repercussions to your real-world identity. If you have an unpopular opinion, then you need to be able to speak anonymously. It's one thing to speak and write anonymously. It's another thing to do business anonymously. If you're going to do business anonymously, it really changes the character of things. It needs to be a service that is settled immediately, where there's no opportunity for abuse. But there's also this reputation system. You can have anonymous reputations online, and I think that's perfectly viable. And someone who has built a strong anonymous reputation has something that's just as good as an identity, right? Their identity has been verified, not based upon real world, but based upon reputation. And that's what public key cryptography gives us, is the ability to build a reputation. So I think you need both, just like we need crypto assets that don't have any restrictions and are anonymous. And at the same time, we need crypto assets that have complete restrictions on who can own them and are not anonymous. Or maybe they're anonymous to the public, but not anonymous to the issuer. The whole spectrum has uses, and it's the embracing the full spectrum of applications that gives the system power. If you only have anonymous transactions, well, that cuts you off from a large percentage of the market. If you don't have any privacy, well, then you're harmed in another way. So you need both. It's kind of like with dollars, you've got your cash for your privacy and your bank accounts for your government tracking. You need both for a society to function.
I agree 100%. It's a matter of balance, I guess, between the two things, because they do compete with one another. They're at odds with one another. And one of the fears I have is that with the tied to your personality or to your personal identity, those identities are necessary for voting in the government elections, et cetera, and many other applications, as you mentioned. But can they be co-opted, or not co-opted, but can they be overused to the point where you're more or less forced to get anything done? You have to not be anonymous. That's the fear that I have, is the balance will get out. It will become out of balance in favor of physical identity.
Well, and Tom, the interesting thing, I was actually reading a news article a couple days ago, and we have people from China here who perhaps you guys can speak up too. But apparently China and the US they held their 7th industry forum, Internet Industry Forum in Washington, and it was co-hosted by Microsoft and the Internet Society of China. And essentially they're trying to come to an agreement. They say that they agree on 90% of things. There's just a 10% that they haven't formed consensus on. But that kind of concerns me a little bit too, because from what I understand about China, they have the Great Firewall of China, essentially, where they keep their internet is not exactly free. So it's going to be very interesting to see how governments take this and where they try to push it to be. Do you have any opinions on that, Bytemaster?
Governments are going to be moving toward internet identities, and if the free market doesn't provide it, then we'll end up with something enforced by the government. If the free market can produce it first, then we can have something that is better than what the government will eventually force upon us. I try not to be a judge of what is ideal on privacy versus identity. The market is going to ultimately allocate resources between the two. If there is demand for privacy, then people will provide services to those who want the privacy, and they'll be able to earn more money if it costs them more to do so. So it's just like the black market day. Everything in the black market is more expensive, but you can get things that you need. I think that it's a mistake to try to say we know what the proper balance is between the two. The market will sort that out.
I think that's actually a pretty good answer. It's something that I think about personally a lot, because you see certain places where there are attempts at like a two-tiered internet, and some people don't understand the possible repercussions to that, and others of us perhaps are overly sensitive to it. And I think we probably in the crypto sphere are more on that side of the spectrum, which I guess will probably cause us to be some of the first to create those solutions, right?
One thing that appears to me is that with regard to striking a balance, I guess in the night, from my perspective, the ideal thing would be a 50-50, but that's not going to happen because if you just look at the way the world is now, the majority of the world doesn't care about their identity to the extent that we're discussing it here. They are very happy at relinquishing all their privacy for the most part. So if you really look at what's going to happen down the road in terms of a balance, an equilibrium established, it won't be equal. It will be very much, there'll be a minority of people that want to have anonymous issue. Anonymity is more important, and the majority won't want that. So, but I think you're right, Bytemaster. It all has to be provided in some fashion. And as to whether or not the marketplace is the best decider of it, well, that's probably the only thing that's a reasonable decider of it, even if it isn't in the favor I would like it to go.
Supply and demand. Demand for privacy increases when the cost of not having privacy increase. When the cost of privacy falls, demand for privacy will increase. So what we need to do is we need to make privacy cheaper so that more people will opt to have it. And the government is, on a daily basis, doing a pretty good job of increasing the demand for privacy, the more they invade us and use it against us. So in a free society where you're not under constant threat from governments, I suspect that privacy will have relatively little value to the average person because there's no threat. They're not being threatened by their lack of privacy. But if it ever becomes a threat, the value goes up. So that's how the market's going to balance it. There's no point in worrying about something, about not having privacy if there's no threats to you, if everyone knows it.
That's a very good point. And I see the biggest threat is the government's taxing us. I mean, if it wasn't for the tax system the way it is, we wouldn't have the overblown violence that we have in the world today. I mean, it's a blank check for this violence. And so even though people don't make that connection many times, that is the underlying root of why there is so much violence in the world. I mean, well, maybe not the underlying root, but it's a major reason for it. So the taxing system, and of course the economy being as bad as it is why people feel that pressure. So they're going to favor privacy more than not. Unless they're rich and have so much money, they don't really care about the taxes.
Well, taxes are a big impact on financial privacy, that's for certain. But when you're doing business with people, it all comes down to a balance. What is the threat the government's posing, and what is the cost of identity verification? Ultimately, I think that in a free society, all identities would be verified and that there would be very little anonymous transactions, because the only way for a society to self-police itself is to have transparency and to have everyone know who they're doing business with. And then so that they can shun people who are outcasts because they haven't paid or they've harmed someone or so on and so forth. So I don't think you can have a large global society that is free without government and completely private, because criminality would flourish in the absence of light. Criminals can move from town to town, and their reputation would be reset every time they move to a new town. So small towns have low crime because everyone knows everyone. They know who they're doing business with. They know where they live. They know their kids. And if someone is misbehaving in some way, word gets around the town, and as a result, people don't misbehave. You need to create a global small town phenomenon. The internet makes that possible. So we have to recognize that identity verification is a key step. Imagine if we turned identity verification on the government. And now we know who the government employees are. We know who the tax collectors are. We know who the thugs are, the police brutality. We know all these people who and what crimes they've done. And then we can choose whether or not we do business with them. That's possible if we do identity verification. If we deny ourselves identity verification, then we lose our single biggest power, and that is the ability to shun or not do business with those who commit violence. Therefore, I think it's imperative that we move to a society that uses a reputation system that is public and global.
Well said.
The interesting thing that I find myself wondering is how will this reputation be granted? Is it going to be like a 5-star thing like on Amazon? Or, how does this work? Because these are questions we're going to have to answer at some point in time, and I don't know if you have any insights into this. I'm assuming that you probably have thought about it, probably on a deeper level than most of us here.
I've got it worked completely out. I just don't have time to express it. We're at the 1 hour mark now, but I hope to express the details of my grand vision through BitShares TV over the months ahead.
Sounds good. Well, thank you very much, Bytemaster, for answering the community's questions. Thank you, everybody, for attending. And I'm going to go ahead, and since we're finished with this part of it, I do want to go really quickly over and let everybody know that about the Null Street Marketing newsletter and the community members who have been pushing that effort forward. Essentially, they have now, this is looking at last week's newsletter. They have 613 posts as of November 24th, 80 conversations, and 84 total members from our community. Right now, they're working on a few projects. I'm going to let everybody know about the Twitter They're going to have a Twitter Thunderclap campaign that's going to be coming up. BitShares BitMarket from BTS TV he has a BitShares book that's going to be coming out. MethodX has now created a voting tutorial, so make sure to check in on that. Something that's very important that I'd like everybody to, if they're interested, to contact Rob Rigo regarding the CME virtual conference. The last time I checked, he was looking for somebody to help attend the booth virtually from their computer, wherever they are. You don't have to fly or drive anywhere. And there's a registration fee of 2 Bitcoins, but if there's a 10-minute BitShares pitch that is delivered, I believe it's via video, they will cut it in half to 1 Bitcoin. Let's see, there's a couple other ones. Reddit tipping ads. Toast has offered assistance if someone is willing to attempt to create a Twitter and Reddit bot. So if anybody's interested in that, please contact Toast. Open Bazaar, MethodX plans on reaching out to his Open Bazaar contacts because now the 0.4.25 client is out. It opens up a lot more options with regard to that. And I think that's about it for the marketing newsletter. There are some others, but it's a pretty long one. I would urge you guys to go visit the forums and look at the marketing newsletters. HPMV, are you on? Oh, I don't see him on here. He must have left. HPMV is the guy who is focusing on putting these up every week. I would urge everybody who's here to try to join up on the conversation on the Null Street forums. And if anybody is interested who is showing up a lot here, if you're interested in moderating some of these hangouts as we expand into, I'm wanting to expand into delegate hangouts in the future, please contact me via PM on the forums and we'll get talking about that stuff too. I would like to run a delegate, hire 8 different people at 10% each and have them essentially run hangouts for all this and put them up. So if you're interested in any of that, let me know or let the parties of interest know, and thank you for showing up.